Okay, we're back for our last little bit, and the reason I wanted to save this last example for this new video is because this one is going to be different than the other examples. We want to know how many more electrons than protons does each object have. We want to find the net charge in elementary charges. Let's say that you had, you came up with a net negative charge of negative 2.4 times 10 to the negative 19th coulombs. We want to know how many extra electrons that is. So 2.4 times 10 to the negative 19th coulombs. We're going to convert that into elementary charges. 1.6 times 10 to the negative 19th C, 1e. And I'm going to write this down here. Okay, we do 2.4 e negative 19 divided by 1.6 e negative 19. And notice that what we get negative 1.5 e, which means 1.5 extra electrons. Now, once you've got this written down, I want you to cross this off right now, and I want you to write down that this is impossible. This will never happen in the real world, okay? There is no such thing as half of an electron, all right? An electron is the smallest thing that we can possibly have. You cannot have a fraction of an elementary charge or a decimal. Matter of fact, a better rule for it, with the exception, and we'll talk about this right towards the Regents, right at the very end of the class, with the exception of things that are things, and that's got in quotation marks. I don't want you to think about this right now. With the exception of things that are inside of a proton, objects can never have what I would call a non-integer number of elementary charges. You cannot have a fraction of an elementary charge. Now, notice what that means. You can have fractions of coulombs. That is fine. That's allowable. You can never have a fraction of an elementary charge. Okay? And the reason is, once you have an electron, there's nothing, you can't split an electron in half. That's just a rule, a natural rule, a rule of the universe. You cannot take an electron. There's nothing that it can split into. You either have an electron or you don't. There is no such thing as half an electron. Okay? There's no such thing. It does not exist. All right? So if you ever get an answer in elementary charges that is a fraction or a decimal, okay? Notice that this was 5 electrons, 16 electrons, 800,000 electrons. 1.5 electrons, that doesn't work. You can't possibly have that. You can have a fraction or a decimal amount of coulombs. That's fine. But if you get an amount of charge in elementary charges, it cannot be a decimal. Okay? It has to be a whole number of electrons or protons. The last thing I want to talk about is interactions between different types of charge. This is going to be very similar. A lot of you guys are familiar with magnets. You know how magnets work. Charges are very similar. Okay, if you have two positive charges, they will repel each other. If you have two negative charges, they will also repel each other. And actually, if you have neutral, they don't repel. There is no effect. Okay, they will do nothing. On the other hand, if you have positive and negative, they will attract towards each other. The real tricky ones to remember or what happens if you have a neutral object and a charged object, neutral and positive or neutral and negative. You might think nothing happens. You've got a neutral. Well, think about this. In the winter, everyone's done the thing where they take a balloon, they rub it on their hair, and then you can stick it to a wall or you can stick it to something else. Well, originally, that balloon was neutral. By rubbing on the hair, you turned it either positive or negative. Okay, I think it's negative. I can't remember for sure. Doesn't really matter. You turn it negative, and then you go and stick it to a wall. That wall is probably neutral, right? And the balloon will stay there. So it is true that if you have a positive and a neutral object, they will attract towards one another. The same thing with a positive and a negative and a neutral object. They will attract, and we'll talk about why they attract tomorrow. But neutral and charged objects will attract toward one another. So, in conclusion, like charges repel, opposite charges will attract. a charged object and a neutral object will attract. And if you have a neutral object with a neutral object, nothing will happen. There's the starter on electric charge. Tomorrow what we're going to talk about is how to charge objects. There are many different ways that you can charge objects. We're going to go in depth with all of them. You do have, or maybe Wednesday, you do have some homework. I will send that out to you. But other than that, if you have questions, feel free to reach me here. If you need anything at all, feel free to reach me however you want to communicate. On Remind is useful. And, well, stay healthy, guys. Hopefully I get to see you soon. Bye.